The plains of Plataea were silent. No banners flopped, no songs were sung. Only the wind moved, whispering through thousands of bronze shields standing motionless beneath the morning haze. Across that open field, the mightiest empire on earth waited. The Persians, conquerors of cities, burners of temples, killers of kings. The horses stomped, their armor glimmered, and their drums rolled like distant thunder. And opposite them stood 10,000 Spartans. Not as defenders this time, but as executioners of memory. For a decade they had carried a ghost, the ghost of Thermopylae. The 300 who had fallen. The king who had refused to kneel. The mountain pass that had become both a tomb and a promise. Now, in this wide plain, that promise would be kept. The Persians saw soldiers, but what advanced toward them were shadows of the dead, men born from grief, trained in silence, marching with vengeance in their breath. Dust rose with every step. Spears gleamed like fire in the sun. The ground itself seemed to tremble as Sparta came for what was owed. At Plataea, the age of empires would shift, and the world would learn that some debts, no matter how ancient, are paid only in blood. If you love stories of courage, vengeance, and the battles that shaped civilizations, stay with us. The war that began at Thermopylae is about to end. The year was 479 before Christ. Greece stood in the edge of destruction. The Persian Empire stretched from the valleys of India to the shores of the Aegean. Its armies had burned Athens, slaughtered cities, and filled the air with smoke and terror. Xerxes, king of kings, believed the conquest complete. He returned to Persia, leaving his trusted general Mardonius behind to finish what had begun at Thermopylae. But Persia had misjudged what had truly happened in that narrow pass. Thermopylae had not been a defeat. It had been a vow. The 300 Spartans and their allies had fallen, but in dying they had lit a fire that would not go out. The Greeks had seen that courage could stand against tyranny, that honor could defy empire. And now, that fire spread through every city of Greece. Sparta mourned its king but did not crumble. Mothers who had lost sons did not break in grief. They sharpened the spears of their younger children. Fathers who buried warriors did not weep. They trained the next generation to fight. Across the land, whispers grew into words, and words into an oath: Thermopylae will be avenged. In Athens, the ruins still smoked, but defiance stirred beneath the ashes. The Athenians rebuilt, gathering what strength they had left, knowing that survival alone was not enough. Greece would not live as a slave beneath Persian rule. In Corinth, in Megara, in the cities scattered across the Peloponnese, messengers carried the call to arms. At the head of this movement stood Sparta. Discipline forged in centuries of war made them the natural leaders of the resistance. The regent Pausanias, young yet resolute, took command. He carried not just the authority of Sparta, but the unspoken will of Leonidas himself. His mission was clear: to end the war his king had died to begin. Meanwhile, Mardonius grew restless. He was confident that the Greeks, divided by rivalries and pride, would never unite. He sent envoys offering peace to Athens and Sparta, riches, freedom, and alliance in exchange for surrender. But his offers met only silence. No Spartan would kneel. No Athenian would trade pride for peace. The Persians waited for fear, but what came instead was fury. Then, in early spring, Sparta moved. Not in haste, not in case, but with the calm precision of judgment. 10,000 Spartan hoplites gathered, their scarlet cloaks rising like blood against the dawn. From across Greece, allies answered the call. Tens of thousands joined them, men from Athens, Corinth, and beyond. City-states that once fought over borders now stood shoulder to shoulder, the shields locking into one wall. For the first time, Greece marched as one. They met in the plains of Plataea, the chosen ground of destiny. It was a wide, open field, perfect for battle, where courage alone would decide the future. There, the Greeks dug in, their camps simple, their spirits unshaken. Across the plain, the Persian host glimmered in gold on silk. Archers, cavalry, and infantry from every corner of the empire waited for command. Mardonius smiled when he saw them. To him, this unity was folly. He had the numbers, the horses, the sky-darkening archers. He believed victory already written. But what he could not see was the quiet strength of men who had already lost everything and come to take it back. Plataea would not be another Thermopylae. It would be its answer. The night before the battle, the Greek camp was silent. No music, no feasting, only the sound of armor being checked, if shields tested against the dirt, if whispers to the gids that know, one else could hear. There was no fear left among them, only a calm that comes when men have already made peace with death. They remembered Thermopylae, the mountain pass where courage had met annihilation, and they swore that Plataea would be the opposite. There would be no last stand this time. There would be victory. Across the field, the Persian camp burned with light. Mardonius and his men celebrated, as if the battle was already won. Wine flowed, drums echoed, and the laughter of soldiers filled the air. To them, the Greeks were broken tribes clinging to lust pride. They had seen Sparta lose once. They had watched Athens burn. They believed that the war was only a matter of crushing what was left. But arrogance is a slow poison. Mardonius didn't know that the silence in the Greek camp was not weakness. It was focus. 10,000 Spartans under Pausanias stood in perfect order, every man trained to obey without question, to fight as one body, one mind. Around them gathered 70,000 Greek allies, men who had laid aside their rivalries to fight for a single purpose. For once, Greece was not many, but one. In the darkness before dawn, the cold wind moved through the camp. The stars hung above them like witnesses. Pausanias walked the line, stopping to look each man in the eyes. He spoke little, for words were not a Spartan weapon. A nod, a steady gaze, a hand and a shoulder, that was enough. He knew what they all knew. This was not only a battle for land. It was a reckoning. The Persians would learn what it meant to fight men who carried not the hope of victory, but the certainty of duty. As the first light touched the horizon, the Spartan lines began to move. Shields lifted, spears lured, armor gleaming faintly in the gray dawn. The sound of 10,000 sandals striking the ground rose like a single heartbeat. Across the plain, Persian scouts spotted the motion and hurried back to their camp. Mardonius ordered his cavalry forward, confident that a sudden charge would scatter the Greeks before they could form up. The horsemen thundered across the field, their hooves shaking the earth, their arrows darkening the air. But when they reached the Greek line, they found no fear, no confusion. The Spartans stood shoulder to shoulder, shields locked, spears forward. Each charge broke against them like waves against rook. The Persians circled, loosing more arrows, trying to provoke a counterattack, but the Spartans refused to move. Hours passed under the burning sun. The Persians grew frustrated. They shouted insults, rode closer, fired again and again. Still, the Greeks waited. Pausanias watched the field in silence. He could see the enemy growing tired. Horses foamed at the mouth. Archers reached for arrows that were no longer there. Even the wind seemed to still, as if waiting for a signal. Then, at the exact moment when exhaustion began to dull the Persian rhythm, Pausanias raised his spear. It was the smallest motion, yet it rippled through the Greek ranks like lightning. The line began to advance. Nit running, nit shouting. Just a steady, relentless march. Spears leveled, shields up, eyes fixed forward. Across the field the Persians tried to regroup. The cavalry turned, desperate to strike again, but their strength was gone. They hit the Spartan wall and shattered. Brins met flesh, and the rhythm of the battlefield changed. The quiet patience of the Greeks transformed into thunder. Spears thrust, shields crashed, and the dust rose so thick it turned day to twilight. The Persians fell back, confused and disoriented, unable to understand why the enemy they had micked for waiting now moved with such precision and power. For the first time, fear touched their hearts. They began to realize that this was not the same Greece they had faced before. The men before them were not fighting to survive. They were fighting to balance the scales of history. The moment the Spartans advanced, the field of Plataea erupted into chaos. Persian drums thundered, horns blared, and orders shouted in a dozen languages clashed in the head air. Archers scrambled to form ranks, cavalry wheeled in panic, and Mardonius, confident yet irritated, rode forward to see what was happening. He still believed his numbers would carry the day. But war is not a contest of numbers. It is a test of will. The Spartan right wing moved with perfect precision, their bronze shields overlapping like scales of a single creature. They did not run. They did not cry out. Their silence was more terrifying than any roar. Every step forward was measured, inevitable, unstoppable. The Persians launched a new assault. Their arrows darkened the sun, the cavalry swept from both flanks, but the Greek line did not break. When arrows struck, shields absorbed them. When cavalry charged, spears reached out like a fist of iron. The battlefield shook with the collision of empires, yet in the heart of that storm, the Spartans moved with chilling calm. Mardonius sent his elite guard forward, men wrapped in armor of gold and silver, warriors from the far reaches of the empire. They shouted in strange tongues, waving banners heavy with jewels, but their splendor was their weakness. The Spartans met them not with beauty, but with discipline. Bronze crushed silk, iron pierced gold. The sound of combat became a grinding roar, the kind that eats away at courage. Persian commanders screamed for order, but no one listened. Amid the confusion, Pausanias saw his moment. He shifted the Spartan right wing, not toward the enemy front, but toward the Persian center, where Mardonius commanded from atop his white horse. It was a move that would echo through history, when later mirrored by Alexander the Great himself. The Spartans were not trying to break the army. They were trying to kill its heart. Mardonius realized too late what was happening. He ordered his personal guard to hold, but the Spartan line came in like a living wall. Spears thrust, shields slammed, and men vanished beneath the press of bronze on dust. For a moment, the battle swirled in madness, shouting, screaming, the crack of spears, the ring of metal. Then one Spartan, seeing Mardonius raised high in his horse, hurled his spear. It flew through the haze of battle and struck with a sound that silenced the field. Mardonius fell. The white horse reared, blood splashing across its flanks. The Persian commander crashed to the earth, and with him fell the will of the empire. For a hot beat, the battlefield froze. Then came the collapse. The Persian line, once so proud, broke like glass under the hammer of panic. Soldiers threw down their weapons. The archers fled. Cavalry turned their horses and trampled their own men in desperation to escape. What had begun as a battle now became a rout. Across the field, Greek war horns bellowed. The Spartans advanced, their formation unbroken, their pace steady. There was no cheer, no exultation, only the measured rhythm of retribution. The Persians ran for their fortified camp, seeking safety behind walls built to protect conquerors. Now those same walls became their prison. Arrows flew from the ramparts, wild and desperate, but the Greeks pressed forward. The Athenians attacked from one side, the Spartans from the other. The gates shuddered under the assault. The sound of shields slamming against wood echoed like thunder. When the gates finally gave way, the Greeks poured in. Inside, chaos ruled. Persian soldiers fought in corners, slipping in blood, stumbling over fallen comrades. Fires broke out, tents collapsed, and the air filled with the acrid stench of burning silk on flesh. The Spartans fought with the cold fury of men fulfilling an ancient promise. Every strike was a memory of Thermopylae. Every fallen Persian was one more debt repaid. The archers in the walls tried to hold their ground, but the Greeks raised shields and advanced beneath the hail of arrows, spears thrusting upward with precision. The camp became a slaughterhouse. Mardonius's banner fell, trampled beneath Spartan sandals. The Persians screamed for their gids, but none answered. The sound that replaced their cries was the deep, resonant call of Spartan war horns. It was not to sing of triumph, it was judgment. When the fighting ended, the Persian camp was nothing but smoke on ruin. Thousands lay dead among the treasures they had brought to flaunt their wealth. The tents that once held gold on silk now held silence. Amid the wreckage, the Greeks found Mardonius's tent still standing. Inside were piles of riches, food, fine carpets, and jeweled goblets. The contrast was stark. The Persians had lived like kings. The Spartans had come with nothing but their armor and a promise. Gold could not buy what they carried. As Pausanias entered the tent, he said nothing. He simply looked at the spoils of empire, then at his warriors, men smeared with dust and blood, and understood what victory truly meant. Outside, the smoke drifted across the field. The sun was high now, glinting in the brinns of fallen shields. Where once the Persian army had stood in splendor, only silence remained. Plataea was no longer a battlefield. It was a graveyard of pride. Greece had done the impossible. The invasion that began with fire and arrogance ended here in ashes and humility. When the dust settled over Plataea, the world seemed to exhale. The mightiest army of the East was gone, shattered not by numbers or gold, but by the will of free men. Across the plain, the Spartans gathered their dead in silence. There were no grand speeches, no celebrations, only the quiet dignity of those who understood the price of victory. The Persians were left where they had fallen, nameless in the mud, the banners burned, the voices silenced. Messengers carried news of the battle across Greece. In Athens, the people wept with relief. In Sparta, mothers who had lost sons did not mourn with sorrow but with pride. They had kept the promise of Thermopylae. King Xerxes, far away in his palace, received the message of defeat. His dream of conquering Greece died that day, along with his best generals on his illusion of invincibility. The world he had tried to command now looked upon him as a man who had been broken by the unbreakable. Plataea was not just the end of a war. It was the beginning of an idea that the strength of a nation lies not in its wealth or numbers, but in the courage of those who defend it. Greece, once divided by rivalry, had stood together and changed the course of history. The Persians had fought for empire. The Greeks had fought for freedom. And freedom endured. Long after the blood had dried and the weapons had rusted, the story of Plataea remained. A story whispered through centuries, reminding the world that even the greatest empires fall when they forget the power of unity and the quest of arrogance. If you believe that courage, sacrifice, and honor are what truly shape history, then stay with us. Because every age, every nation, has its own Plataea, a moment when ordinary people stand against the impossible and remind the world what it means to be free.